Thank you. Thank you for sticking around. This is a much reduced version of what's there, so it won't help you to follow along. More specifically, I've removed all the jokes, so this will be a humorous presentation. For the past generation, as ever more adaptations of Shakespeare have appeared across the globe, especially in Asia, scholars have debated the consequences and implications of the global proliferation of Shakespeare, focusing in particular on the question of whether Shakespeare acts as a vehicle of reciprocal cultural exchange or of continuing Western cultural hegemony. Is Shakespeare just another global brand, indistinguishable from iPhones and Big Macs, that sustains Western cultural and economic dominance? Or have intercultural engagements and appropriations enabled forms of resistant agency and, in some instances, even subverted the traditional flow of cultural capital by exploiting Shakespeare as raw material to be reshaped and exported to the West? In this paper, I would like to wade only tangentially into this debate, first by emphasizing what Li Lan Young likes to refer to as the positionality of the audience member, specifically for me, how familiar the individual is with the language of the source play. And second, by focusing on film adaptations of Shakespeare that are self-consciously intermedial in nature. But first, a confession. I am uncomfortable with the term intermediality because in its present usage it can mean almost anything or nothing particular at all when applied to theater or film. Suffice it for the moment to say that I will use the word to mean, in the words of Agnes Paetow, bringing into play the tensions generated by media differences. Okay? I would like to look at two Asian films that adapt Shakespearean material in ways that highlight differences between live theater and film, and in the process evoke silently, indirectly, lines from the source plays that can resonate differently for different audiences. Akira Kurosawa's classic Throne of Blood adapts Macbeth into an epic saga set in the samurai culture of feudal Japan by, as many have shown, incorporating crucial ideas from Buddhism and utilizing the resources of no theater. As you will no doubt remember, the film's opening sequence starts with the end and circles back to the beginning. Specifically, it opens with a panoramic shot of a fog-covered open expanse as a male chorus provides background music and intones the following words in an incantatory chant. Look upon the ruins of the castle of delusion, haunted by the spirits of those who perished, a scene of carnage born of consuming desire. The camera then focuses on a wooden post monument that is inscribed with the words, "Here stood Spiderweb's castle," which will turn out to be the castle that is contested in the film. As such, we begin with an evocation of the Buddhist concept of mu, or nothingness, the sense of the overriding futility of human endeavor that is driven by consuming desire. Significantly, the Buddhist idea is delivered, as James Goodwin has pointed out, through a chant that is modeled on the traditions of no songs. In utilizing theatrical resources of representation to communicate the idea of nothingness, Kurosawa seems very much to be following a rhetorical strategy central to Macbeth itself. After all, the play unfolds with the witch's prophecies serving as prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme, and of course, the play's arguably most famous soliloquy uses a theatrical metaphor to link the ephemeral illusoriness of theatrical performance with life itself. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and fruts his hour upon the stage and is heard no more. The metaphor stresses not only the paltry insubstantiality of life with its trivializing pejoratives, a shadow that struts and frets, but also its ephemerality, lasting only an hour, after which comes silent extinction. I'd argue that Macbeth's lines above echo throughout Kurosawa's film, but especially loudly at the moments when the stories of Lord Washizu and Lady Asaji, the Macbeth and Lady Macbeth figures, culminate. Okay, it says slide, so I hope the next slide. Good. Okay. The equivalent to the sleepwalking scene takes place as Lord Washizu, in full armor for the final battle, is led to a chamber by terrified ladies to witness what might be best called a performance. Indeed, Lady Asaji's chamber is framed by a large door opening, as if it led to a stage. Further, inside the chamber, one first sees only a large kimono spread over a stand like a curtain, which is then pulled aside to reveal Lady Asaji reenacting the motions of washing her hands as she repeats variations of interjections that will recall Lady Macbeth's lines like, "Out, damn spot, what will these hands ne'er be clean?" and "Here's the smell of blood still." Okay. I would add that in the way that Lady Macbeth rehearses her gestures, lines, her repertoire of repeatable stage mannerisms and performances, and therefore assumes the posture of a player who struts and frets his hour upon the stage, Lady Asaji becomes most visibly a no performer in this culminating scene. Her dance of gestures might be likened to the, and please excuse my Japanese, I have no Japanese at all, Kyu no Mai, the fast-paced dance that comes at the end of the Jo-Ha-Kyu structure of No. Indeed, Kurosawa famously showed his actors in the film no masks as indices of character, and added, the performance also has a defined style, and in devoting himself to it faithfully, the actor becomes possessed. Whether intended or not, there is an irony here in the way he discusses possession. One recurrent pattern in various forms of nose follows the possession of a character by an overwhelming emotion, or that emotion in an afterlife state as a ghost. One might then say that, in the film, the actress becomes increasingly possessed by the mask, even as Lady Asaji becomes progressively more possessed, until, in the paradoxical culmination, she loses herself entirely in possession. I should quickly note that by herself, I do not mean something like personality or character in the common sense of those words in contemporary Western society. The dramaturgy and thought of No are emblematic in nature, embodying, in the words of Donald Keene, distillations of powerful emotions that transcend the particular character. The tragic futility staged in the film is embodied in the character of Asaji through the emblematic practices of No. Something similar occurs in the case of Lord Washizu. His death at the hands of his own soldiers by a barrage of arrows, the last of which pierces his throat in a moment of stunning suspended animation, is perhaps the iconic image of the film. You all are familiar with it, no doubt. The wild spasms that he undergoes as he fruitlessly tries to avoid the arrows that continue to skewer him and certainly recall a cue dance of agony unto death. What I would add is that the entire sequence is staged as a theatrical spectacle. The wooden castle with its galleries recalls the design of both English amphitheaters as well as their predecessors, the courtyards of inns surrounded by multi-level galleries. Here, however, the long and rather broad gallery on which Lord Washizu stands functions as a stage on which he first bellows his lines and then struts and frets with such sound and fury. This theatricality is of the essence here, I believe, insofar as the intermedial incorporation of theater into the film energizes the scene with the liveness of theater, its spontaneous embodiment in the moment of performance, and its illusory ephemerality. Put another way, it is the liveness of theater that enhances and reinforces the reigning idea in the film of the illusory insubstantiality of impassioned, physically embodied human endeavor. To put it in the terms introduced by Agnes Peto, the intermedial evocation of theater works in both sensual and structural modes. delivering the sensuous liveliness of action with an immediacy that one might more readily associate with live performances, while structurally aligning theatrical performance with the Buddhist idea of nothingness. The ending sequence of the films begins with Lord Washizu descending, stuck full of arrows, into the yard and silently collapsing in death as fog rises, which eventually leads back to the opening sequence with the shot of the empty expanse where the castle once stood. Tomorrow creeps in a petty pace indeed towards the last syllable of recorded time. In intercultural terms, however, the alignments are not so neat. One could certainly think of Kurosawa's adaptation as a challenge to Shakespearean authority, especially with regard to the putative feature of Shakespeare that is most commonly evoked to explain his global appeal, namely universality. When one reads Macbeth's soliloquies that express nihilistic fury as well as an apocalyptic sense of nothingness, one might hesitate to attribute the quality of universality to Macbeth's vision of life, since it belongs so powerfully to the singular character. In transposing the play into samurai culture while deploying the emblematic aesthetics of No, Kurosawa localizes the vision of the play, and in so doing, paradoxically, universalizes it. It is by progressing through localized culture and practices that the feature that we might call universality acquires full substance, as though transformative adaptations were necessary to realize the possibility of universality. At the same time, however, the adaptation will appear the most transformative, the most challenging to the intercultural power dynamics between East and West, to those who are the most familiar with Shakespeare's lines, people in this room, to those who, in having devoted themselves to the study of Shakespeare, might easily be said to be the most vested, consciously or not, in sustaining the hegemonic status of Shakespeare. It will be to those who are the most clued in to how Shakespeare's lines resonate in the silences that adaptations assume the most potential for productive disruption. An analogous dynamic operates in the case of the Korean film The King and the Clown, a 2005 feature directed by Junhae Lee, that tells the story of King Yeonsan, a 16th century king of the Joseon dynasty, and a group of itinerant performers or clowns who come to reside at the royal palace. The film can hardly be said to be an adaptation of the Shakespeare play, however. Its primary sources are the story as told in the annals of the Joseon dynasty and in the play Yi by Kim Tae-won. However, it does have parallels with Hamlet in that, as the director himself has openly acknowledged in interviews, court performances by the itinerant troupe serve to expose hidden secrets behind various court intrigues. In fact, the director has also noted that, as part of preparations for writing and producing the screenplay, he read the so-called Four Great Tragedies along with Aristotle. Further, he has added that the character of the king is a combination of Lear and Hamlet, and that, drawing on the rather problematic and a contested word hamartia in relation to Shakespeare, he conceived the film's main characters in Shakespearean terms, as containing a tragic flaw in their character that drives their destiny. While one can certainly see this in the film, I would also argue that the biggest Shakespearean debt is structuring the film on and as an exploration of the idea contained in one of the play's most famous lines, "The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king." As such, the film is self-consciously intermedial and centralizes, even more than the Throne of Blood, the role of theatrical performance and theatricality itself in delivering its vision. At the same time, however, a self-consciously nationalistic element enters into the film in the intercultural transpositions that reshape borrowings from Hamlet. Yu Jin has explicitly indicated in interviews that from rather early in his life, he was driven by a certain rebellious hostility towards the world, and which, in relation to film, expressed itself as resistance to what Frantz Fanon called the dependency complex of the colonized, which he found evidence for in the dominance of Western countries and Japan in cinema that is popular in Korea. The intercultural intermedial turn in the film is then a complex maneuver that evokes and cinematically deploys the resources of theater, both to advance the film's political vision and indirectly challenge Shakespeare. The film is bookended by two similar scenes. In both, we have two performers or clowns enacting a comic and endearingly obscene scene of wooing that involves the two characters ascending and acrobatically performing on a tightrope. One clown named Chang Sang plays the male role, while the other, a very attractive flower boy, named Gong Gil, plays the woman's role. As you can see, he was extremely pretty, and apparently he's still very popular because he's so damn pretty. Okay. Korean audiences will, of course, recognize right away that the performers are performing a variation of taechum, or masked dance, a form of populist masked folk dance drama that is a hodgepodge of song, ritual, dance, acrobatics, and interactive dialogue that is often satirical and subversive. It is a commonplace to note, for instance, that the upper classes, or yangban, are routinely satirized in taechum. One could also add that the subversive energy continues in the cross-dressed performance by Kung-gil, as she becomes, as we will see, the object of erotic fascination. If class hierarchies are satirized by a social satire, the liminal performance by Kung-gil disrupts established categories of gender. Putting all this subversive energy into a tightrope act intensifies the daring and social danger associated with this form of theater, while at the same time importing intermediately into the film the precarious, ephemeral liveness of performance. If the film itself is directed towards some form of subversive disruption, that is, its source of energies is very much the liveness of theater. In the event, after the first scene, the two clowns eventually end up in what is present-day Seoul and team up with a different itinerant troupe to perform lewd taechum skits that burlesque King Yeonsan's court and his escapades, his sexual escapades, with his new concubine, Noksu. A court attendant, a eunuch named Chosun, witnesses the performances and orders the punishment of flogging. But during the actual flogging, Chang Sang and Chosun agree to a deal in which the troupe will perform before the king on condition that if the latter, the king, does not laugh, they will be executed. The court performance starts off horribly as nervousness strikes some of the performance, reinforcing again the precariousness of live performance. But finally, during a sequence in which Kung-gil, as the concubine, does a handstand and spreads her upside-down legs wide open before the masked face of Chang Sang as the king, in this scene, I don't know if you can see it, so she's upside down, and the person who's playing the king is staring well at her crotch. The king himself actually erupts in laughter. Okay. Perhaps more surprisingly, later that evening, the king and his actual concubine, Noksu, reenact the scene in their chamber and engage in some clowning sexual play, during which Noksu notes that the king had seemed especially fascinated by Kung-gil, the girl. And indeed, as the story goes on, it becomes clear just how erotically fascinated the king was, as he appoints the troupe as resident entertainers despite heavy opposition from court ministers, and eventually takes on Kung-gil as a special, erotically charged favorite who for a time displaces Noksu from his affections. It's almost like Gaveston in Edward II. For a Shakespearean, it may seem that the play, rather than catching the conscience of the king, served as a dream of passion, a fiction that leads to distraction in his aspect, and his whole function suiting with forms to his genuine passion. That is to say, the illusion of cross-dressed performance by this little Aias of sorts serves to highlight the illusory elusiveness of both theater and the object of the king's passion. The central performance in the film, and the one that comes closest to recalling Hamlet's mousetrap, is orchestrated by Cha-san and enacts the story of how King Yeonsan's grandmother conspired, along with his late father and the father's concubines, to murder his mother by making her drink poison. So that's the backstory. The current king's mother has been murdered, but it remains a mystery, and then through this performance, the king comes to know of his grandmother and his father's conspiracy. Okay? All right. The tension of the scene is created not only by King Yeonsan's learning the truth about his mother, but also by the presence of King Yeonsan's grandmother herself and his late father's former concubines. At the culminating moment when the mother, played by Gong-gil, drinks the poison, she recalls Gertrude to some extent by calling out for her son, "The queen carouses to thy fortune, Hamlet." That's not what she says, but that's what it recalls. At this moment, King Yeonsan suffers a fit of madness, or perhaps just extreme rage, and kills the concubines with his sword, while his grandmother dies from shock or a heart attack. This play then delivers the truth about his childhood traumas to King Yeonsan, but also catches the conscience of the queen grandmother. Needless to say, things start spiraling out of control in earnest after this performance, with courtiers and ministers becoming more hostile to both the king and the players. Eventually, as a result of scheming by the concubine Noksu and some plot twists that are too complicated to get into here, Changseng is sentenced by the king to have his eyes burned out with a hot iron. In the final scene of the film, Changseng re-enters the palace and, with a blindfold covering his burnt-out eyes, reenacts for the court a variation of the tightrope performance that opened the film, which Gong-gil eventually joins. So that's Changseng looking a little bit like Gloucester. All right. Tragic and intensely emotional seriousness enters the scene, however, as the two indirectly confess their devotion to and passion for each other, with Gong-gil shedding tears as she speaks. And then this is the two of them on the tightrope. In the final exchange, Gong-gil asks Changseng what he would like to be reborn as in the next life, to which he replies, "A clown." And the same question is posed by Changseng to Gong-gil. She likewise replies, "A clown," which leads Changseng to conclude, "For paltry creatures, there's nothing to do in this world but let loose and be merry." This is a very poor translation, my own, of the Korean, which is 징한놈이 이 세상 한판 신나게 놀다 가면 그뿐. The phrase in question is 한판 신나게 놀다, which might find an equivalent in the Cajun phrase laissez les bon temps rouler, or perhaps eat, drink, and be merry, though it is a phrase that can also be used as a rousing cheer at the beginning of rituals, performances, plays, or parties. Maybe let's get ready to rumble. A part of what gives this exchange such a poignant power is that the two understand that their time as clowns has run out, that this moment of letting loose through theatrical performance is also the last. To intensify the sense of things coming to an end or time running out, the final tightrope performance is intercut with scenes of noblemen leading a rebellion against the king. In fact, the film proper ends with the doors of the palace being broken open by an onrushing mob of armed rebels, followed by a freeze frame of Changseng and Gongil jumping precariously high in the air above the rope. That's a freeze frame in the film. Okay. The precariousness of theater, the elusiveness of the cross-dressed Changseng as erotic object, the instability of power, and the evanescence of all play come together in this final moment. The rest is silence, the film seems to suggest. With regard to how the film treats Hamlet, the play, though very indirectly, it is as though Yorick had come alive and joined the players to take over the play, to expose the court and turn it upside down, to plunge the king into a dream of passion and demonstrate how even a king returneth to dust. However, the revision of Hamlet goes further in reconceiving the role of theater and play. A big part of the oppositional energy that drives the film derives from its vision of authenticity, truth to a passion that marginalizes those who act on it and to which the world is hostile. But it's not only that those who pursue their passions are punished by the world. The passion is figured as authentically realizable only in the precarious, evanescent moment of performance. As such, while drama, or playing, may in fact hold a mirror of the nature, its very nature as imaginary play also paradoxically offers access to the authentic realization of passion. It offers not just a play within a play, but a world within a world. A part of the achievement of the film is to localize that sense of play and embed it deeply in the history and culture of Korea, almost as if to say, in a Bloomian turn by a belated strong poet, playing was there all along before Shakespeare. But now the question, does this suggest that the film appropriates Shakespeare in a way that challenges Western cultural hegemony? The film was an unexpected box office hit in Korea, earning $75 million in ticket sales. It was not a hit because audiences recognized allusions to Shakespeare and heard lines from his plays resonating in the silence. So 99.9% of the people probably never thought of Hamlet while viewing it. Perhaps the film's most subversive feature, its resistance to cultural dependency, is its silent disregard of Shakespeare. Thank you.